All right, everyone. uh, I'll go ahead and do this as a short presentation, and we'll do an upload later. I am so sorry for the trouble. It's a struggle. It's a struggle. Everything's a struggle, right? Life's a struggle. So this is a struggle here, and maybe if anyone here has some questions for me, it feels inappropriate to have questions go directly to questions without kind of doing a short presentation that people could, ask those questions. But I just don't feel confident that I'll have a consistent line throughout this. So maybe a discussion is better. But I'll just keep talking. I'll go ahead and just see if y'all stop me. But the No More movement, basically, what is it? It is a movement of not just the people of the Horn of Africa who were responding to a war, an imperialist war by the United States, backing its proxy force in the region known as the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, or TPLF, which is an ethnic separatist group, a right-wing tribalist type group. And what happened was that back in November 2020, they started a war, openly admitted it on TV. And what then happened was that, this was while Trump was in power, and actually it was the election day in the United States, with the expectation that Biden would come into power. And so, just so you know, actually the Trump years, when Trump was in power, we all remember him saying that, Africa is shithole countries, and that actually, ironically, was to the benefit of Africa, because he took his eyes off Africa. And what the Democrats tend to do is, use humanitarian, war doctrine, R2P, against African countries. And so this increased focus, on Africa, was expected by TPLF, the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front. Again, this fascist group that exists in northern Ethiopia on the border with Eritrea. And so they started a war back in November 4th, 2020, and it was against the Northern Command, which had 80% of the arms of Ethiopia. And TPLF had been in power since 1991 until 2018, was taken out of power by popular protests throughout the country from all the different ethnicities, but starting with the Oromo protest, huge and massive protest. And so by 2018, they had removed TPLF from power, and Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed became the first Oromo president, and the Oromos make up the largest ethnic group in Ethiopia. And so what happened was that they Prime Minister Abiy immediately made peace with Eritrea. He then went on to make peace with Somalia and formed a tripartite alliance between the three countries. And essentially, just to kind of just help everyone understand what this meant, it was basically these three countries forming a sort of resistance bloc. And at the center of it, I want to make it very clear that Eritrea had no cooperation with AFRICOM. It's the only country in Africa that had such a situation. When you talk about Latin America and you look at Cuba and the importance of Cuba to Latin America, to South America, Central America, it is a base of resistance. It serves as an anchor. And similarly, Eritrea is very much the case, but there's a lot of confusion about Eritrea. And people haven't known this in the past, that, Eritrea is one of the four, great people struggles, of the modern era. So you have Cuba, you have China, you have Vietnam, where these people engaged in people's struggle, right? And they carried out a war for total control, political defeat, military, political, economic, social defeat of the enemy. And, against imperialism, against the ruling class, and basically took control of their countries by a gun, basically. And so Eritrea is always outside of this conversation. And it's always interesting when we talk about Pan-Africanism, why so much of the time there isn't enough focus on Eritrea. And so anyway, the reason why I bring this up is because making peace with Eritrea was a signal to Washington. And in fact, to see Eritrea, Ethiopia, and Somalia in 2020, in January of 2020, signing a tripartite alliance, this was a huge deal. This was a big deal for Africa, and Washington saw this and got scared. So it would only be 10 months later that they take their puppet regime that had existed for almost 30 years and then tried to bring them back to power by having them attack the Northern Command, which again had 80% of the arms of Ethiopia. And so when they attacked the Northern Command, they killed thousands of Ethiopian soldiers who had been actually non-Tigrayans, all types of Ethiopians they were literally helping the day before fight locusts for the Tigrayan population, helping the Tigrayan people. Despite this, this TPLF group took Ethiopia to war and then fired missiles on Eritrea and plunged Eritrea into this war as well too. It basically tried to turn it into a regional war. So are y'all still with me? Okay. So what then happened was for when Biden came to power, immediately, in fact, even before he came to power, you had many Biden officials like Susan Rice and others basically salivating and threatening, action against Eritrea and Ethiopia, in that period after it was known that Biden was going to come to, that he'd won the election. And so he comes to power, unbelievably hostile media campaign against Eritrea, against Ethiopia, against Somalia. And so what happened was that a bunch of activists, organizers, I should say, who had been organizing in their respective communities. I was mainly doing that in the Eritrean community. I had my contacts in my progressive circles and Pan-Africanist circles. Ethiopians had theirs, Somalis had theirs. And what happened was that we kind of looked at each other, found each other online, seeing all this disinformation about what was going on, about TPLF, basically saying that there was a genocide going on in Tigray, and it was just all lies. And so we started having this discussion about building a new Horn of Africa and forming a new Horn of Africa coalition in about February of last year. And this was in response to Biden coming into power and just realizing that this guy is going to make it even worse. And it's just all TPLF. And I want to make it clear again, TPLF was the enemy of the entire Horn of Africa. And I want to include Somalia in this because remember that in 2006, Ethiopia invaded Somalia and TPLF was in power. And so Somalis hate TPLF, with the exception of a few clanist Somalis, those who had been eaten well and fed well, basically getting paid off by TPLF. The Somali people, Eritrean people, Ethiopian people were almost universally against TPLF. So anyway, this idea of a new Horn of Africa coalition started in February of last year. About a month later, flying under the radar was a demonstration with both Eritreans and Ethiopians in Somalia, or in San Francisco, excuse me. And it was actually reported by a Black Agenda report and also broadcast on Pacifica Network about, Eritreans and Ethiopians getting together to basically say end all imperialism and, stop supporting TPLF and this kind of message. So what then happened was that they just kept pushing out all this propaganda, lying. It just continued nonstop. So by November of the following year, it had been a year into this crisis. And we saw the disinformation. We saw all the divide and conquer tactics. And then we saw the imperialist war basically ramping up against, the Horn of Africa, saying that they were going to intervene in the Horn of Africa on behalf of TPLF to stop Tigray genocide. That became a hashtag, by the way. And I want you to know, Tigray genocide, that hashtag was actually started the day the conflict started on November 4th, 2020. So anyone that says that this wasn't some campaign that was manufactured to create a narrative beforehand and pre-plotted, you're talking crazy, because the facts tell otherwise. So what then happened was, a year into this, there was a Tigrayan activist who did not agree with what was going on. She was actually a CBS journalist by the name of Hermela Aragawi, who, she was a CBS journalist in LA. And in fact, she was a TPLF supporter. I shouldn't say TPLF supporter, more so she was a Tigray genocide activist. And the reason why was because her mom was in Tigray when this war started, and she hadn't heard from her mom. And she, being a Tigrayan and seeing everything that's going on and scared for her mother, became a prominent activist for the Tigray genocide hashtag and movement that had been forming around that hashtag. So when her mom came back, she told her a different story about what was going on the ground. And so in September, Hermela decided to speak up. And she basically, being an insider and TPLF activist, Tigray genocide activist, spilled the beans, basically said everything that was going on, started questioning the narrative. The entire Horn of Africa rallied around her. And because we were looking for people to come out and start speaking the truth, because if they're saying there's a genocide in Tigray, and you have a Tigrayan who is now saying this is not true. I'm a journalist. I have a blue check mark by my name. I was on the inside with TPLF. I've seen how they operate. I've seen it all. So she spilled the beans, came out, started doing the rounds in media and all this kind of stuff. And so we immediately, this coalition that had been forming earlier that year, we teamed up with Hermela. We brought her in, we found each other, and we decided we're going to start a campaign at the 1-year anniversary of the start of this war to basically fight the BS. And that's what happened. And so we called it, we were fed up. And so what we said was, we said no more. We called it No More. And that was the name of the hashtag. And so immediately it took off like wildfire. In fact, No More was so powerful that what happened was that I think it was 2 days later, let me go to my presentation. About 2 days later, using the No More hashtag, because there was the elections in Virginia, and if you recall, there's a huge, some of you that may live in DC, in the DMV area, you'll know that there's a huge population of Ethiopians and Eritreans in that part of in Virginia. And so what they did is pretty much all of them said they were going to get the incumbent, or they were going to get Terry McAuliffe out, and they were going to bring in the other guy. And so that's exactly what happened. And so there's actually here it is. So it was Youngkin. They brought in Glenn Youngkin, took out Terry McAuliffe, and the Washington Post the next day headline reads, "Why some Ethiopian voters in Virginia swung for Youngkin and how it may spell trouble for Democrats elsewhere." What they were recognizing was that basically there are large populations of Eritreans and Ethiopians and African immigrant groups who basically are in these strategic urban centers where they have a very clear, a deep dislike for Biden, and because of the history of the Democratic Party in the Horn of Africa. At one point, I remember Susan Rice laughing at the fact that TPLF had won elections by 100% of the vote. And when they asked her, about this, if she thought this was, if this was Democratic or Democratic election, she laughed and said she was 100% sure, joking, saying she's 100% sure, like it's a joke because they won by 100%. So, so it was kind of like spitting in the face of the Ethiopian people. And so that nasty taste was left in the mouth of the Ethiopian people, the Democratic Party, Obama, and all of them. And Biden was part of that administration. So he comes back to power, and it's the same thing. So there's a deep hate from Eritreans, Ethiopians, Somalis for the Democratic Party. And so they were committed to taking them out of power everywhere they are. Everywhere to find an Ethiopian that's not a TPLF activist that supports any Democrat anywhere is, I would say, nearly impossible in my in my view. So anyway, they saw that and saw the power of No More immediately, and they censored No More. They actually stopped the hashtag from trending in Ethiopia, then in Kenya, then in Uganda, then in all these different countries around the world. They actually had to stop it internationally. In fact, you could see that it was trending at 4,000 to 5,000 tweets per hour, which is, go check other hashtags that trend like that. And so what made it worse in that month of November was, there was a general sitting in Djibouti. And remember, there's 8 military bases in Djibouti. You have, it's a place that's very complex, but mainly it's a Western controlled, sort of, base for, even though China has a presence there, that's a new thing, but, it's seen as a captured nation, unfortunately, a puppet nation, serving as a proxy for Western powers. So you have a U.S. general who threatens to invade Ethiopia at this point. And so what then happened was the Ethiopian people, Eritrean people, feeling like they were going to start a humanitarian war and intervention, all this kind of stuff, felt like we needed to get out into the streets. So on November 21st, actually only a week prior to that, we only had 1 week to mobilize for this. We planned on it being on November 21st. And millions of people came out around the world. And this was actually, we reached out to, remember, this is a work of coalition building. So we reached out to Pan-Africanist groups, Black groups, progressive groups, because we wanted to build a massive coalition. And so we had the Black Alliance for Peace on board. We had the Answer Coalition. We had other folks. And everybody could see that, this was imperialism was ramping up for war in the Horn of Africa, and people said no more. And so it became very clear that there was, stiff resistance against imperialism, by all the people around the world, rallying for Ethiopia and Eritrea. And so I will tell you, there were actually bills in Congress that were stopped, and basically they could not continue the, seeing that I have 10 minutes. So let me just make a quick, let me wrap this up. I'm so sorry for the lack of presentation and, being a little delayed here in Eritrea, but okay. So the point is that many came out into the streets. State Department saw this. They literally went out into the streets, asked us to change our hashtag. And I'm not joking. I'm talking about State Department officials asking us to change our hashtag to divide and conquer us, saying, what they said, can you change it to I stand with Ethiopia? And remember, Biden is getting briefed on the Horn of Africa every day. We know this because a Washington Post journalist said this, and it's in my presentation, but I can't show you the tweet where it says that. And so we know that Biden really cares about the Horn of Africa. They pretend like they don't care. You got Ukraine right now taking eyes off of the Horn of Africa, but the Horn of Africa is, you lose that, you lose everything. You have to control this region, and they've done it for so many years through Ethiopia, through what's known as the anchor state policy, which was formulated by National Security Advisor Anthony Lake. And so basically that ended in 2018. The Horn of Africa is coming together. They have this movement called No More. They've done everything in their power to weaken this movement, to stop our mobilizing capacity, trying to divide and conquer. I can't go into all the conspiracies, but all I want y'all to know is that the movement is strong. You can't break the resistance of the people at this current moment, because of the fact that There's a strong people-to-people relationship and a strong desire for more. The governments may change, like we saw in Somalia with Hassan Sheikh Mohammed, who came to power. Farmajo was there, great leader, did some great things. People were concerned, oh my goodness, Somalia is going to go in the other direction. But we recently saw the Somali leader go to Eritrea, and it was revealed that there were 5,000 commandos that were trained by Eritrea. Remember, Eritrea is a country that's not controlled by AFRICOM. It's outside of that relationship. And remember, when you saw the vote again, for sanctions on Russia at the UN, there were 5 countries in the world that sided against that, which is a very dangerous position to take, seeing how hostile the United States has been against anyone that sides with Russia, even seemingly sides with Russia. Eritrea stood up, voted against that. And I think a lot of people recognize that. I don't know if y'all recognize it, but my point is that the United States has created a world where it's now like you're either with us or against us. And Eritrea, because of it doesn't have a bodyguard that it pays for to ask it to take control, that controls the security apparatus. So if you are a country in the Horn of Africa and you side with Eritrea, you are choosing to go the more self-reliant route where you control you're now trying to control your own security. You're not depending on daddy, or your bodyguard to take care of you, whether that's the French, whether that's the US or whoever. You own your own security. And that was Eritrea's model, is to control its security and to be strong militarily. And so anyway, the No More movement, it brings together the diaspora, it brings together the people in the country, and it brings together the government, which includes the national militaries. How often is that the case, where you have the military, you have the people and the diaspora all connected, and then it's spread across multiple countries? That is this movement. It's going to continue to grow. I'd be glad to take any questions. Thank you. I see some questions here. I guess I'll get started with this. I've seen reports of a Romo TPLF alliance. Is that true? So here's the thing. The No More movement, it takes a very it's pro-unity. It takes a anti-tribalist, anti-sectarian position. And the thing is that in Ethiopia, in 1995, in 1995, the TPLF, when it came to power, it passed a new constitution, and it then installed a system known as ethnic federalism. And basically, just to understand what this is a system where, imagine every country in the United States was for just one ethnic group. So you'd say, okay, this is for this nation, or this state is for Chinese. This state is for white people. This state is for black people. This state is for this people. Now, we can talk about the merits of this, but the problem is that some people may think this is a good thing, but in actual practice in Ethiopia, if you ask the people saw this as a terrible system, where 3 things are basically going to happen when you have this. You're going to have people fight over borders, they're going to fight over resources, and then they're going to ethnically cleanse their region. And this was actually outlined by President Isaias, president of Eritrea, in the 90s, when he saw this model being installed, that it was basically a ticking time bomb for Ethiopia. So as much as we can argue that might be a good system, it was a terrible system in actual practice. And so some of the supporters of this, among them were some groups. There's different different factions of OLF, but the more hardline OLF factions were actually for this sort of thing. And so we have to remember that the Oromo are historically marginalized people, along with all the other ethnicities, basically the ethnicities that are not in power in Ethiopia. And so it's very much the case that some of these different groups have these grievances that are unaddressed and feel as though they want to just break away from Ethiopia. But for the most part, most Ethiopians are against this idea and see it as ludicrous, and that basically they're about Ethiopian nationalism. Because if you were to think about the logic of dividing a nation along ethnic lines, imagine what that means let's just start with Ethiopia. You have 80 ethnic groups there. Imagine what that means. You're going to have fracture along, you're going to have 80 nations now in Ethiopia. Imagine what that means for Africa, which has, depending on how you class ethnic groups, 1,000 to 2,000 new countries in Africa. Is that what's going to happen? So OLF and TPLF, both tribalist, at least the hardline versus the OLF, because some of them have actually integrated into the new government. But now OLA, the more hard-wing faction known as Shunne, OLA Shunne, has partnered with TPLF and allied itself with TPLF. And so it is, what you're seeing is basically, what is this called? Combinationism, where you see groups that if they were to be together, they'd be at each other's throats, but for the sake of a common mission, they come together. And this is very much the case with OLA and TPLF, that they would probably kill each other because of their hardline, rightward views about their ethnic group being the one that should, be in power and lead. And, our history is great and we're the chosen people, this kind of mentality. But for the sake of bringing down the Ethiopian federal government, they are in an alliance. So that is true. And so, and of course, in all war, there are atrocities. And I see this as a second question about like heavy-handed responses. This is a war in which it is a war against, these tribalist, hardline groups, sectarian groups that are trying to divide and destroy Ethiopia. And because they're trying to come together and they're being supported by outside powers such as the United States and the West, it's not going to be easy to just get, to end this war overnight, and it's going to take time. And so there are atrocities, and Abiy has come out and admitted that there have been some war crimes and that people were actually arrested who were involved in this sort of stuff. So, but yeah, so this is the case. And I think, does Abiy identify as a Pan-Africanist? I would say, as I mentioned, if you look across the border in Eritrea has a very clear vision. It has a by the way, I ask all of you to go read the 1994 charter, the Eritrean charter that was published in 1994. Eritrea has a very clear vision of where it wants to go: regional cooperation in Africa. It's a very Pan-Africanist vision, and even going back to the EPLF manifesto, which is named Nehnan Elamanan, which means our struggle and our goals. And in it clearly maps out, it has a Pan-Africanist vision, and wants to connect with leftist groups around the world. And so you have that on Eritrea. You have a national vision. It's Pan-Africanist. But unfortunately, when you look in Ethiopia, right now, there's an absence of politics there. You don't understand what the position of Abiy is. We don't know. But one thing that we do know is that he's for a united Ethiopia, and he's not, kowtowing to the United States. Like China, like great powers, like Russia even, you will see some appeasement, right? You'll see some appeasement because, remember, Ethiopia is a highly dependent nation where 20 million of its people depend on food aid. Those numbers may be changing now with growing wheat production and other programs that are going on in the country, greening of the country. But from year to year, it's generally 10 to 20 million people, depending on how bad the drought is from year to year. And Ethiopian Airlines, I believe it's $3 billion a year that it brings in for Ethiopia. It's a Star Alliance member. And already the United States and members of the CIA have openly come out and said, like Cameron Hudson, that they should target Ethiopian Airlines and the Star Alliance and take them out. So if that was the case, can you imagine a loss of $3 billion in revenue, or even half of that, or whatever they would lose? It'd be devastating to the country. So there's a certain level of pragmatism that likely will have to exist in Abiy to appease the United States at the current moment. But for the most part, the rhetoric, especially early in this conflict, was very much, we're trying to go in our own direction. We're trying to be more self-reliant and this kind of thing. But, in June of last year, it seemed to be the start of some of that appeasement. And so, we have to keep eyes on what's going on with Abiy's government, but it's going to be a process. And I say, keep your eyes on Eritrea, keep your eyes on the region, because Eritrea remember, it's a bastion of resistance in Africa, in the Horn of Africa. And so long as Ethiopia and Eritrea are allied, and you saw with Somalia now, the training of 5,000 commandos, it doesn't look like Somalia and Ethiopia are going to deleverage themselves from Eritrea and weaken relations. Those relations seem to be growing, and they're still strong. And so when you see a waning of the relationship with Eritrea, then you should grow concerned. Because then that says, what's the agenda here? What's going on? Are they trying to go back in this direction of being a proxy force for the United States, giving in, selling out, that kind of thing? So, anyway, I think that's a good measure for me personally, and a lot of people in the Horn of Africa, of where things are going in terms of, internally in Ethiopia. I'm seeing a question about drones. Abiy's funded by the U.S. and they use drones against Eritrea. I don't know where this is coming from. Funded by the U.S. Just keep in mind that the United States, remember, it cannot lose the Horn of Africa. If it loses the Horn of Africa, it loses Africa, in my opinion. It loses the connection between East and West, because remember the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, right? Can you imagine if Eritrea, Ethiopia, Somalia, they surround Djibouti? Basically, Djibouti would be isolated, and Djibouti would essentially have to go, it wouldn't be able to trade with anyone. It would be isolated, and therefore you'd have to wonder if a military presence is even possible by the United States in Djibouti at that point, when it's surrounded in such a way. So from a practical perspective, the United States has to want to maintain good relations with the Ethiopian people, if not the Ethiopian government. And so in doing so, it has to continue, humanitarian aid. Remember, there's a high level of dependency at this current moment in Ethiopia on external powers, on IMF, on humanitarian aid, and this kind of thing. That is why the Gerd Dam is so important for the Ethiopian people. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam will allow Ethiopia to export energy, export water resources and this sort of stuff. And so not only will it electrify the country, it will allow it to electrify the region around it and use that as a source of dollars, and also be able to export more stuff, and also have that, through agriculture, manufacturing, all that stuff. It'll be very important because it'll be electrified, it'll allow all that stuff to happen. So dollars will come to Ethiopia and allow it to remove it from the position of dependency. I want y'all to know that Ethiopia, it is so fertile that it can actually feed all of Africa if it were to properly, boost its agricultural capacity. So my point is, Ethiopia is very dependent. So it depends on, external, support in terms of like financial at the current moment. But most Ethiopians at this current moment see it as temporary. And so it'll be a process. And so if we're going to be pragmatic about it, it'll be a sort of deleveraging that will happen over time, most likely. And the thing about the drones, No, there's not drones being used against Eritrea. That's not true. The drones were actually being used by being used against TPLF. By the way, I should call them terrorists because TPLF is actually documented as a terrorist group by even the Department of Homeland Security. They use terrorist tactics. I can talk about so many different things that they're doing right now that suggest terrorism. Just like what they're doing in the Afar region, the Amhara region against the people there, which are just totally senseless. Even the OLA, which is allied with TPLF, the Oromo Liberation Army. They just killed, thousands. It's hundreds, but now it's coming out that it's potentially thousands of Amharas, ethnic Amharas that are living in Oromia region. And you wonder, why would you kill civilians for literally no reason other than to ethnically cleanse the region? These are acts of terrorism. And so when Ethiopia is attacking TPLF and using drones, it's attacking terrorists. The idea of drones is we hate it. You never like to see war, especially war against African people. And so we want to end this war as soon as possible and bring peace as soon as possible. But sadly, yes, the drones are being used, and it's the case against TPLF at the current moment. So, again, we can go back to this idea of the unipolar world ending, and basically the United States forcing countries around the world to basically choose between their so-called rules-based order, versus the others, which is the other great powers, Russia and China. And so it's becoming a multipolar world with more and more stark dividing lines. It's either you're with us or against us. And so, given what the United States is doing in the Horn of Africa, the Horn of Africa, although it may, some countries in the Horn may appease, as I mentioned, they are increasingly boosting their relationship with China and Russia. And you can see with Ethio Telecom, I believe uses Huawei's technology, or is planning to, and so I wouldn't be surprised to see more of this in the future. Russia is also boosting its presence. You've seen over the last couple of years the explosion of these special envoys from different parts of the world. So there's the EU, China, the US, Russia. All these different countries have these special envoys for the Horn of Africa, showing how related these countries are, like to these conflicts, how interconnected they are, and how they these outside powers are taking a approach that engages all of them from a Horn of Africa perspective. So anyway, yeah, I think we've got a couple more questions here. All right, I think that's my time. I appreciate y'all joining me in this discussion, this presentation, which sadly was done a podcast style because of the low bandwidth situation that I'm in here in Eritrea. But I thank you for listening, and I will explore the idea of posting this as a full presentation at a later time. My contact information, I think. Oh, by the way, I was going to say, go to nomore.global. Right now, we do have a website up. We're going to boost our capacity in that regard in terms of the website and getting some active communications on there. But this is a long-term project. The No More movement, the peoples of the Horn of Africa coming together. We want this to become a genuinely Pan-Africanist movement. I want to say one thing before I leave. that there are multiple governments and peoples in the Horn of Africa who are approaching the No More movement, who want to be part of it, who want to figure out how to organize their diasporas in various countries around the world in a similar fashion to what is being done with the Horn of Africa people. So Eritrea, Ethiopia, Somalia, they're coming together. Diasporas are having conversations. I have a whole bunch of new Ethiopian, Somali, Sudanese friends and comrades, and across the continent, Kenyans, Malians, so